Hey, 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 howdy do. Welcome back, everybody, for episode number 4 of the It's Another Thing Movies podcast, the E2KG network podcast that covers movies that are available via digital distribution. And by and large, we try and do the movies that are just dropping, or dropping in the same month that we're recording. But we have a slightly wonky entrance into 2019. So at the end of 2018, we had some shifts in the co-host lineup, and I personally got started diverting more of my time doing more live streaming in games. So that upset my whole schedule a little bit, and it took us a little while to figure out exactly how we were going to fit this podcast into the E2KG lineup and workload. We have figured that out, and you can expect us kind of back on our relatively normal battle rhythm of twice a month. I think for 2019, I'm a little less wrapped around the axle about it being every 2 weeks, but I think you can expect every 4 to 5 weeks there'll be 2 episodes. So here with me, as always, I have my stalwart, endearing co-host, Mr. Peter Morrow. Peter, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Very good. Very good. So, man, did we bite off? I don't want to say more than we can chew.
Bit off a lot.
Yeah. So, heading into 2019, we elected not to scramble to a new assignment, but to complete the last one that we left dangling in 2018, and that was to watch what technically, I guess, from a distribution standpoint, is technically a Netflix original film, Orson Welles' final film, The Other Side of the Wind, as well as the documentary that goes along with it, They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. Now, Peter and I didn't get a chance to do a lot of pre-production, so Peter, I want to mention, if it's okay with you, kind of the way I've staged this is, my pitch is that we really predominantly talk about The Other Side of the Wind, and then reference They'll Love Me When I'm Dead when it's appropriate, just as additional reference material. I didn't really know that there was a huge point like reviewing They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. It was a good
documentary.
Yeah, it really was.
Let me rephrase. It was a good documentary for the film that it was documenting.
Yeah, so we're going to get into the details. I will say this was an impressive package and thing for Netflix to drop. As far as when they dropped it, I also feel like it was kind of elegantly done in November. We had wanted to watch it in November. I wound up watching it in December, which I feel like was fine. It kind of dropped as a holiday block movie, which to me runs November to December. And it was an excellent piece of content to have to view, like in between and over, various breaks in the November and December ramp down. So great. So number one, for viewers and listeners, if you're not familiar, this is a spoiler review show. So we're going to review these 2 movies, films, whatever you want to call them. We're going to get into every nook and cranny in detail, as is necessary for us to render our opinion, such as we see fit. We may skew away from a spoiler or 2. We may not. So if you haven't watched it, this is designed for people who have viewed the film and want to hear or participate in a discussion about the specifics of it. So if you haven't viewed the film, I would recommend that you go do so and then come back. And actually, it's kind of a good thing. Actually, I could throw some shade at the documentary because kind of in some ways that's our job, right? Like, it's kind of, if you want to watch the film and then come listen to more discussion about some of the trivia and the ins and outs of it, that's kind of a partially, it's another thing. Movies is kind of a companion piece of content to go along with these movies that are dropping. And in this case, it would be great if you watch the documentary. I know that not everyone can consume documentaries. I normally can't consume documentaries. But so if you watch the movie, you don't necessarily need to feel obligated to watch the documentary. If you want to come listen to this, we will try and flesh out some of those details for you. So Peter, while I'm getting the social media out about the episode being live, and without going into the super specific details that we have lined out in the agenda, just kind of what was your overall takeaway from the film and the documentary?
You know, I am one of those guys that loves documentaries. I consume them. Um, I probably should have refreshed myself. It's been since November since I've watched both of these, but I mean, my general takeaway was this was indeed, you know, a passion project for both Orson Welles and the many people who were involved in bringing this movie to a reality, you know, to production and distribution. A lot went. I mean, it's a crazy story in and of itself, and the movie is kind of wacky. There's a lot going on with it, and I'm still having trouble unpacking everything. So this is something that a film student would probably be able to. Um, it's actually it kind of felt like a film student movie in a way to me. Just the storyline itself, you know, it felt very. God, I'm having trouble putting it into words, but it had that unpolished feel without being unpolished. Gritty and very the movie itself felt like a documentary.
Yeah, it definitely had that kind of necessitated rough edge to it.
Yeah,
It felt like a working man's film, so to speak, like a working film director's film, if that kind of makes sense. You know, not the spit and polish of like a J.J. Abrams flick that, you know.
almost a rough cut.
Yes, exactly. Which felt tonally appropriate.
Yeah,
So yeah, so as you mentioned, this is kind of not our normal assignment, right? Normally we maybe go for things that aren't quite as artsy. I mean, we've done some artsy stuff. We did
2001.
yeah, we did 2001, and Interstellar. So
Oh yeah,
so we're not totally devoid of artsiness, so to speak, but we definitely tend to not. Well, we did Beasts of No Nation too. So it's, but I guess we don't necessarily do. It is not our normal wheelhouse stuff to do kind of film house stuff, like indie stuff, and this is definitely kind of in that vein. So let's talk a little bit through the history, kind of in and so Orson Welles started filming this film in 1970, and I guess I would say primary photography, if you can even call it that, took place between 1970 and 1976, and then the film kind of goes into hibernation, and then. And then he continues to work on it a bit throughout the 80s. Now, it's hard to get into like all the history of Orson Welles but basically the gist of it is after Citizen Kane, he had a few more films, but you know, he was largely kind of undone by compatriots of his within Hollywood. And was, I think, at a certain point, eventually fired from one film, and then took off and went to Europe for the better part of 2 decades. And while he was there, made kind of art house European style films. And then, you know, but persistently and consistently worked to try to get himself back to Hollywood. This film was supposed to be kind of his triumphant return. His return from exile, his walking in from the wilderness. And the big shtick about the film was that it was kind of supposed to be largely unscripted. He was providing a framework for the actors and actresses to work in, but wasn't necessarily giving them every single line. and that's kind of where where we wind up with the film. It is shot as a film within a film, so it is the whole, to do the big rundown. It's the story of a director. Turns out to be the story of a director's last day of his life. He is closing up production on his final, on what will be his final film. There's a party at his house for his birthday, and at the end of the film, he's involved in a major car accident and doesn't survive. Sorry, I just vapor locked. So, and part of the story of Orson Welles' life is, again, and this was the thing that was brought out to me in the documentary. The sad part of the story is that, he has the both the distinction and, I guess, the curse of having filmed what is arguably held by a lot of critics and film historians as being the best film that was ever made in Citizen Kane. And that film is still to date held in that regard in a lot of cases. And so, having achieved that, unfortunately, relatively early in his career, he was kind of foisted on that petard for the remainder, and that's kind of what caused him to suffer greatly as a director. There's also lots of there's very interesting stuff in the documentary. So to me, what leaped out to me in the documentary was all the problems with financing. And I guess just to kind of put a button on it, because I want to talk about it more in the context of the actual movie itself, The Other Side of the Wind. He funded a lot of the movie himself up front. He also had then gained partners. There were a lot of shady dealings with Iranian backers and backers from the Middle East, and different people who came in and other film creators who offered funding. And I think the critical swing of the pendulum at one point was that one of those backers, I think the guy who brought the money from Iran, kind of swooped in that near 1980 time frame, and there's lots of different opinions on exactly what happened. Either you can view it as that individual pulled their funding, or you could view it as that individual stole money that was supposed to be used for the film. I'm not sure exactly which it was, but this individual showed up on set one day and apparently then walked off with a suitcase full of cash. And like I said, we'll talk about some of the other stuff throughout. The movie, there's not a lot of financial data. Usually we do a financial rundown. The really only thing that exists as far as stats on the film is the runtime, which is about 2 hours and 2 minutes. The documentary, funnily enough, is 1 hour and 38 minutes. So here you have a 2 hour, 2 minute film that comes together over the course of almost 4 decades. And then in order to document its history, there's a documentary that's almost as long as the film itself. We're going to talk a little bit more about the cast as we get into some of the details. I'm almost getting to the end of the preamble here. Noted actors and actresses in the film, and I didn't do the full cast because there's a lot of people. Yeah, there's a ton, huge. I think 110 people in total at one point.
Yeah, it's insane.
But the sad thing is unfortunately the film took so long to come to bear that a lot of those people you don't know. And one of the interesting things I read and you get from the documentary is also, unfortunately, is a lot of those people were people who were Orson Welles' age. So they were in the twilights of their careers. This was their last film that they acted in, and some of them died before they ever got to see any part of the film because it was basically vaulted up and hung up in publication rights for decades. I'll just mention some of the big ones and some of the interesting ones. More pertinently, so a lot of these people only had bit parts, but it was interesting that they were in the film. So John Huston plays the lead role in Jake Hanneman. Oja Kodar, who was a very beautiful looking actress of the time, and I think romantically linked to Orson Welles as well, played the lead female role. Peter Bogdanovich, who would go on and would become a large film director in his own right, but also suffered a lot of the same fate as Orson, was kind of castigated by Hollywood and made an outcast, and that still exists for him to date. The rest of these didn't have large roles in the film, but I found them super interesting. And I think this next one, I don't, Peter, I'm not even sure if you caught it. I had to be reminded of it when I went through the cast listing. William Catt was in this film, who played the greatest American hero in the 1980 show. He was a guy who talked to Hanneman in the bathroom in one scene. Rich Little is in the film, who was originally cast in one of the starring roles, in the role that was eventually taken over by Peter Bogdanovich. If you watch the film, Bogdanovich does a host of impressions, which remained a part of the role because originally Rich Little was cast, and that was Rich Little's stick, was doing impressions. Cameron Crowe was also in the film. Les Moonves, who would go on to become the chief executive of CBS until recently, and Dennis Hopper was in the film, almost unrecognizably so. He's in the film in a full beard with a guitar. So that's pretty much kind of the stats and the physical and chemical makeup of the film. Peter, I want to ask you of those cast members, both the ones I mentioned and the others who starred in the film, where did you note particularly outstanding or particularly bad instances of actor and actress chemistry?
I mean, a lot of it felt there were parts that felt kind of stilted, I guess. You know, almost forced.
Now, did you think? Well, as you go through that, tell me if you felt like that was, because there are some awkward chemical mixtures, but I also feel that there are some of those chemical mixtures that are awkward because that's the actual characterization of the interaction between those two characters.
No, I agree. I mean, I found some of the interactions between John Huston and Peter Bogdanovich to be a little forced, but I mean, it was also trying to portray a strained relationship, which ironically, Orson Welles and Peter Bogdanovich suffered from at various points of this process. So I can't say anything was technically bad because of what the movie was trying to do. But at the same time, if some of these performances were in, say, a Marvel movie, or, you know, not necessarily a big blockbuster, but you know, a modern movie, I think that their characters would perhaps be on the cutting room floor. Because, you know, but we're also looking at a different style. This is a 1970s movie.
Yeah, so are you saying that from the aspect of that just there are too many, and there's so many that that they would have just been cut for content duration and length?
Yeah, because, you know, their performance maybe isn't up to. I'm not. I shouldn't say up to, but isn't quite the same as our modern standards are.
Yeah,
it's almost like this was the. Well, no, it's honest to say that, you know, a lot of the acting was something you would see in live theater.
Yeah,
which is different, and I like live theater. I'm not knocking the performances. I'm just saying, if you look at it through modern eyes, it's not going to be the acting that we think of today.
Well, and I think that brings us to a great point, right? That needs to be raised in this conversation. A large part of what's represented in this film, in my interpretation, and is discussed in the documentary, is how this film represents a pivot in the type of movie and the focus of movie making in Hollywood between the 70s and how that winds up losing relevance and becoming an issue for it in the 80s, when they were trying to complete the film. So this film largely represents, in my mind, the type of film that served Hollywood well through the 60s and even into the late 60s, where we're acting almost solely, and atmosphere and ambiance in a great deal is a key part of the film, and it still is today. I don't want to diminish it, but just in terms of the percentage of the ingredients in a film, those things played a larger statistical role.
Right. It's like watching noir.
Yeah, exactly. And if this movie comes out with things like the China Syndrome and other films of that ilk in the 70s, I think it does okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of quick cuts. There's a lot of snappiness to it. It very much feels a lot like Swingers in a lot of ways to me.
Is that's
the Jon Favreau, Vince Vaughn film where I probably can't describe it well, but they're like antiquated. They're like antiquated fixtures in a more modern society. I guess was my take on it, and I've only seen that film once, so I may be conveying more of my emotion of the film than what the film actually is. But the point is that it feels like a filmy film, right? It feels like a film movie, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's about the actors and the dialogue. It almost, and I guess in some ways it is. You could have almost shot it entirely within one room. It could have been a locked room episode.
Yeah.
Right, of a current modern TV show, and in some ways it is, right. It's kind of filmed. A lot of it is filmed at his house, at that ranch, and all of the action takes place there. And as you move from room to room, you get these set pieces between characters, and that formulates the whole story.
Right.
So like you said, there's a certain degree of an anachronicity to it, I think is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Where it is 60s, 70s art house, and you're absolutely right, and I think they say it directly in the film. In the advent in the 70s, where you get Jaws and you get Star Wars, which from a movie history perspective are really the first. It's really the dawn of the movie blockbuster. But also to me, what I took from it is this transition into the 70s. It's of the increasing budgets of movies and how the focus on the commercial performance of a movie rather than its artistic value kind of came to preeminence.
Right.
And it's also that transition out of the old movie financial model where actors and directors, movie studios used to be companies, real companies with permanent standing employees that included creative staff, and you used to work for a movie studio.
Yeah.
You weren't repped.
You were Paramount. You were Fox. You were, I can't remember any other.
Universal or
Universal.
Or
yeah.
Right. So when they transitioned to that new financial model, the financial performance of your movie became a bigger deal, and I think we see a lot of that in the delta between Jake Hanneman and Otto. Or Brooks, I can't remember his name. They call him Brooksy in the Peter Morrow. Yes, yeah,
and Jake Hannaford.
Yes, yeah. Brooks Arlick is just a great character name for a film director, by the way, cast in a movie. But yeah, so you see. I'm sorry. So is it Hannaford? Is the character name?
Yeah, Hannaford is John Huston's character.
All right. So you see Hannaford, who's much more about like creating these great artistic pieces versus Brooksy, who is the new hotshot kid who is capitalizing on, who is well liked in Hollywood because the new generation of Hollywood focuses on commercial performance. So very cool, very cool. For my end on actor chemistry, the wonderful, what is wonderfully displayed to me is, as you mentioned, is that the father son, but very acute moments of awkwardness between John Huston and Peter Bogdanovich in their characters, as you start to gain the sense that these are two men separated by generations that both love and respect each other, but also hate each other, and have a relationship that can clearly, one tip of the apple cart one way or the other, you could see could easily drive them off the cliff to the point where like they never speak to each other for years at a time. And as you mentioned, is actually representative of the actual relationship between Orson Welles and Peter Bogdanovich. But there was a very nuanced performance between both Huston and Bogdanovich when you realize that, Huston's character loves this guy like a son, but also despises him for being representative of the success in the new Hollywood model.
Well, and he's the competitor.
Well, right.
He's the antagonist in a way.
Well, and really, I mean, the rise of Brooksy is the thing that is going to make directors like Hannaford extinct.
Right.
And he recognizes, Hannaford recognizes that. But by the same token, there's a big discussion of money, and there's part of Hannaford's entourage that tells him he needs to go to Brooksy and ask him for money, and that's the last thing he wants to do. But simultaneously, he also feels like that part of that money is kind of owed to him as fealty, right? Like he's the person who made Brooksy the director he is. In a lot of ways, I think he feels like, in a lot of ways he feels like you shouldn't even have to ask him, right? So, breakout performances while we're on that topic. Anything that leaped out at you as far as a breakout performance?
I mean, Peter Bogdanovich and John Huston both stick out in my mind. But and this will be my favorite scene. I really think that the cameraman on the car, I mean, it's probably my favorite. It's my favorite scene that we'll get into later, but it's my favorite probably performance of the whole movie, because here he is barely hanging on in a two-person car with
right.
And it's really happening too. So
yeah, and that cues up my breakout performance. And what I loved, I think what I loved was it's a little bit of a cheat, but while I love the interaction between Bogdanovich and Huston, I actually equally love, or maybe more so love, the interaction of the entourage as a holistic aggregate cast, and the way that their dynamic, both in their interaction with Huston and their interaction with each other, is so revealing of a micro society, and how it clumps around this one larger than life individual, and then also how they all align in a pecking order, right?
Right.
You have the guy who's the main handler, who clearly coordinates everything and also gets a summary veto on anything that comes up. Like, so even if Hannaford tells somebody something and it doesn't go through that guy, he still gets to veto it, right? Like, unequivocally. I loved Billy Boyle's character, who, and I can't remember if that actor was a child actor in real life, or if the character he was playing was supposed to have been a child actor who eventually becomes part of Hannaford's entourage. He starts off like it's like fingernails grating on a chalkboard when I see him at the beginning of the film, and his interaction with like the studio head Max. I can't remember what his last name is, but and how he does a wonderful job actually seeming like a child. When I looked at him, all I could think of is like, that's Shazam. Like that's like a still childlike mind who has a very adult set of experiences, but is still like communicates with a child's diction. So, but that's the one character that maybe grew on me throughout the film, as you see him portray those kind of conveyances of innocence. But then as you get to the end of the film, you see, oh, no, this guy is like, he's aware, he's informed, he gets it. It's just that his interaction with people kind of comes at it from that child actor perspective, almost as an effort to, I think, disarm people. But yeah, I was really impressed by how the entourage felt very filled out. A group of people that covered everything, and you could see those interactions. Overall pacing and length, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that aspect of the film.
It felt long to me, honestly, the whole movie. There were some scenes, I can't think of them at the moment, but there were some scenes I think went a little too long, perhaps, and so it felt a little slow to me. But again, I'm looking at it through the eyes of a modern moviegoer, and what even some of my favorite movies, Jaws, with modern pacing is very slow. So I'm not saying that the pacing is bad. I'm just saying it's slower than we're used to. And a lot of my critiques are going to be probably in that frame, where I'm trying to judge it for what it is, not what movies are now.
Yeah, no, that was a very difficult transition to me, and I mean, and probably a lot of listeners know, and other friends of mine definitely know, I am not a person who does well with nostalgia films. Like, I don't go back and watch old movies. I don't feel obligated to do that. I don't have any interest in doing that. Like, biggest mistake of my life that I ever made was feeling obligated to actually go back and watch Gone with the Wind, and I'm like. That's the last time. I learned my lesson from that. But yeah, it's my feeling is a problem, and it's a problem that's in the seams, is in between the film proper and the film within the film. Like, I get it, and I feel like you almost have to have the film within the film to have the John Dale character, because that's the only part of him you see, because he's not actually present with that group in the current timeline. But I also feel like those are the points of the film that I was like, what the hell am I watching? Right? Like, the mockumentary part of it, I felt like was almost closer. I mean, it was between the two, it was definitely closer to a modern film now, because I almost feel like you could do that mockumentary today and still be okay. Again, as a locked room episode, as you see these characters float in and out, and interact with each other in different mixtures, right? Because that's the other key thing, is that how a scene goes changes radically depending on which character is in the room, which I found kind of remarkable. But it was the film within the film stuff that I was like, what are we doing? And made it feel like the movie kind of ground to a halt to a certain extent.
Let me float this idea by you. It's almost like Orson Welles wanted to get his girlfriend in the movie with some of those scenes.
There was that, yeah, because she doesn't actually act much in the current timeline scenes. Maybe, but I mean, he himself said, and they definitely pushed the concept in the documentary, that part of what this film is about is it's supposed to be showing the grading cultural fiction between like the art house style movies of Europe, and even Hollywood, in earlier decades versus the advent of how films were going and how the new generation of directors was coming along as well. So it's hard to say. I guess my overall feeling is I don't know that we needed as much of it.
Yeah.
And the strangest scenes in the movie are scenes of the film within the film. And those are the ones that skew it so far towards the art house side that it almost loses its accessibility to like a normal moviegoer, I would say.
Yeah. I'd agree with that.
Okay.
Completely.
Cool. So this brings us to our favorite part of the show, and actually kind of the shtick that the podcast was initially built upon, which was what was your favorite scene of the movie?
So it's actually kind of early in the movie, and you've got Bogdanovich and Hudson in the car. It's supposed to be an interview, and of course the egotistical old style director really doesn't want to talk much, so it's really the young protege who's now surpassed his former master that's really doing most of the talking. And I really enjoyed the facial expressions, the interplay between the two being interviewed, the camera crew, all this stuff that's happening on a essentially two-seater sports car. And you've got a whole crew there trying to film it, trying to get something out of it, and it's basically a unresponsive. I don't know if you've ever listened to morning radio, but that really bad interview where the guy has no energy, that kind of thing. But that was the scene that was probably stuck out in my mind most, because it really set the scene for the entire relationship. They both clearly liked each other since they were both in the same car. He agreed to have the documentary. The character agreed to have the documentary done, yet there's still that I'm the guy who made you, and I'm not going to, cooperate.
Right, and you get some great interchanges in that. Like that scene, I mean, it's a critical scene because it really sets the stage of the degree of complexity and nuance in the relationship between those two characters. You get Brooksy trying to answer a question, and Houston's character like turns the radio on.
Yeah,
right? Which is hilarious. There's this one scene. There's this one part where, to me, it's very much like the scene in Seven where Brad Pitt's character talks about the first time he goes out on like a SWAT call or something like that, and it sits with him very heavily. This guy who got killed. But a key part of how he pulls that scene off is the fact that the character can't recall the guy's name. And this is very similar in that Brooks Arlake relays the story of really Hannaford's first real friend in Hollywood, which was the leading man in a film where he was a prop man, and that they roomed together, and that on Fridays they would put their checks on the mantle and then would like strip down to the waist and actually like fight for the pot. But then like the next interchange after that, the character's name that they're referring to is Frank Fryer, and Bogdanovich's character asks him, "Hey, whatever happened to that guy?" And Hannaford has like no idea. Like theoretically, the person that he knew at the outset of his career, but he just has no recollection of him at all. I can see. I love that scene. My favorite scene, and I don't know that I have a favorite scene of one that I love in the movie. It's more so one that sticks with me the most is the scene where Hannaford and the actress of the film grab rifles and start shooting the John Dale dummies that Hannaford has rigged around his house at the beach. So one of the really weird things in the film is Hannaford's makeup man, who's a guy named Zimmer, who Hannaford has fired at the outset of the film, but still makes him go to the birthday party. One of Zimmer's key things is so part of the thing is John Dale has walked off the set, and apparently this is a key thing that is representative of Hannaford as a filmmaker. Is over time he's always tried to snake the woman of his leading man, and so there's always been a great divide driven between the director and his leading actor. And so John Dale has walked off the set. There are also strong themes of homosexuality throughout the film, and there's basically a nod that Hannaford both, snaked the actress, but then also was attracted to John Dale. And part of the reason John Dale eventually walks off the set is because of sexual tension between the three of them. But so Dale has walked off the film before Hannaford can complete it. And all throughout the film, there's this constant question of how are you going to complete the film without your leading man? His makeup man, whom he's fired, his last assignment, his last task, apparently has been to make all of these dummies of John Dale, which there's a solid hour and a half of the movie that you're like, what in the world are all these dummies for? I mean, you don't get it until you get into like the second half of the movie that, his intention is to actually shoot like the character from behind and hope to pass the dummies off as John Dale. So there's really kind of macabre, like set, like prop throughout a lot of these scenes out at his house. They're all staged around like cliffs on the beach, like in seating poses and everything. And then finally at one point, Hannaford just grabs a rifle and starts shooting them. And then somebody comes in, some part of the entourage comes in and grabs the actress. Again, I forget what her character's name is supposed to be, but grabs Oja Kodar and tells her...
The actress is what she's billed at.
Okay. All right. Grabs the actress. Well, there you go. And tells her Hannaford wants her to grab a rifle. And she starts shooting randomly and surprisingly doesn't hit any guests at the party, which I really... So... The scene sticks with me because it's this. I mean, the whole movie can kind of, if you don't settle down and parse it, you can kind of view the movie as this completely eclectic, randomized set of mess. And
I mean, it kind of is, no matter what.
It is. It's a bit of a chaos movie. That scene, to me, more than anything, represents the chaos of the film. But also brings to light what the whole intention for these dummies is. And then there's a payoff at the end of the film because the last scene that was filmed of the film within the film, it should be the conclusion of the film, is actually the actress on a beach interacting with one of the John Dale dummies who apparently has been staged to be passed off as John Dale. So, man, cinematography. Do we have enough time?
They did a lot of really incredible things. And I mean, we really can't knock any of the techniques they used. I mean, it's Orson Welles was a really good director. And he knew how to hire DPs and I mean, what else can we say?
Yeah, so I actually think I would have spent a little more time parsing the history again, more so than the actual cinematography. Like you mentioned, to me, the cinematography is still relatively incredible, and maybe not as a whole piece. There are segments of it that are amazing as far as the art of camera work goes. The story is so Gary Graver is the one crew member who is with Orson Welles through the entirety of this project. In fact, at some point, because he was not getting paid for the film over like the 15 years that they were
he had to
together.
start doing porn, right?
Yes, right. The story is he was out of work. He was either peddling or working at a nearby drugstore. Got word that Orson Welles had returned to Hollywood and was staying in a nearby motel, and called him, somehow got a hold of his number, social engineering, called him up and said, "My name is Gary Graver. I'm a cameraman. I want to work with you." And Orson hired him. And then he wound up being the one guy that stuck with Orson through the whole thing. Had other opportunities to go do different things, went through, times where he was not being paid anything, but remained dedicated because his thing was, look, the mark I want on my career is doing this film with Orson Welles. Like,
he wanted to be Orson's guy.
Right, exactly. Almost sadly to a point where they mentioned in the documentary, actually, so over the 15 years of their relationship, his basic thing was waking up in the morning, calling Orson and saying, "What do you want me to do?" And so when Orson Welles died in 1985, he was actually a little lost. Like he literally didn't know what to do without that phone call with Orson every morning. So, but yeah, if you are a studier of the art of camera work, I think this is a film you will enjoy.
And it's interesting how much they mix the mediums. So we've got 8mm, 35, and 16. And I mean, you can kind of tell where one goes, and because there's definitely quality differences, but it's incredibly well cut and filmed.
Yeah, so music soundtrack, pretty neat. Like, again, I'm not a super huge fan of old things, but as far as it's weird, it's a movie that's filmed in the 70s that felt like all the music was from the late 60s, though.
Yeah.
But amazingly appropriate. I didn't feel like I never felt like what again this music doesn't match the scene or anything like that. And so at the end of the day, Peter, what do you score the film on our 10-point scale with half-point increments? Since I always have to lock you guys down and force you to take a stand.
Well, I mean, for the whole package, I mean, it's a lot to take in one sitting. I don't suggest you watch this and the documentary on the same day. That's a lot of time. I mean, unless you have nothing to do.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. Just to offer a different opinion, it worked really well for me. I watched the movie in the afternoon and then watched the documentary early evening. And so I had them mashed together. I will say that I definitely did that, though. I definitely watched the movie first and then watched the documentary, which I'm glad I did. I don't think I wanted to know. I wanted the ability to interpret the movie artistically first and then hear the history behind it.
That might have been my problem because I did the reverse order, and I was just seeing the scenes that they described, and I kind of had too much information. But I mean, this is not a bad movie by any means. It definitely suffers a bit from Orson Welles' ego, I think. And I feel like a lot of his problems stemmed from his earned ego. But I mean, it's a solid 7 in my book.
Okay, very cool. 7.0. Good score. I, in a surprise to myself, score this an 8.5. And that is, I will definitely note that is highly situational. It has to do with when I watched the film. I watched it in a quiet space, in a quiet time where I didn't have other competing content priorities, so I had time to marinate on it. We picked this assignment like in summer. I'm like, I can't be bothered, right? But so that's why I say, to me, Netflix strategically, like, it was the right time to drop this movie.
Yeah, this is not a summer blockbuster. This is what you would drop just before it's time to vote.
Oh, there you go. As this dropped like 2 weeks before the midterm primary.
No, I'm sorry. Vote for the Academy Award.
Oh, sorry.
This is the kind of film that filmmakers drop right before film awards season.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The last minute Oscar rush. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if this has any impact on that. But yeah, it's an 8.5 because it arrives at a time where normally, like I said, I just can't be bothered with this kind of stuff because in the mad fervor of keeping up with like the latest Marvel movie or whatever. And I think the one thing that makes this movie stand out in its particular style, my biggest problem with any content in this vein, like comic books, movies, TV shows, is a lot of times when it's this kind of movie and it's a talking heads piece of content, nothing happens. Like the character progression and what's revealed about the characters is so minor, almost to the point of being pointless. That is not the case with this movie.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly rich tapestry of very complicated and nuanced characters, and scratching the surface and getting those things revealed to you requires a degree of work. But at the same time, it's done in a very intellectual and deliberate manner. Like, I also don't like the "I got a secret" stuff, right? Like, I like, come on. And like I said, like the core film, I think is an incredibly fantastic piece of work. The movie within the movie, the film within the film thing is again where the edges rub up against pretension. Like I was watching a scene earlier today, and I'm like, this is such a pretentious piece of like let me just show you how smart I am. But there are parts of it that have to be done, and at the end of the day, that 8.5 most notably for me goes to the mockumentary part of it that I really appreciate. So that's it for me. Anything else from you on commentary on The Other Side of the Wind?
No, but I mean, if people haven't seen it after this, you should.
Yeah.
You should. This is a movie. If you're a fan of film, you should see it.
Yeah, and I like look. I'm not a critic. I wouldn't call myself that. It's not a profession. I'm not a.
Right. You're a fan of movies.
Yes, exactly. And if you're in that ballpark or above, I would say, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. This is if you really love movies, like, and if you really get into like,
yeah,
there are people who love movies and they like it to see like what the biggest special effect is or the best fight scenes, and that's fine too. But if you're a lover of movies who gets into all the nuances and all the creative process, to me, this is a must watch. Like, because arguably, I mean, at the end of the day, what it's going to come down to is, is this the crowning achievement of Orson Welles' career, and does this movie in the end exceed Citizen Kane, right? And even if you give the movie a bit of a handicap and say, look, there are things that are there's direct causality of like the funding issues and the production timeline, and if you can figure out a way to view the movie excising all that, is there a progression from what Orson Welles did in Citizen Kane to this where you can see the difference in directorial influence and in a vein that is an improvement? So with that, the other fun part of the show is now you get to sit with us on air. I mean, basically, you get to sit with us and view our pre-production as we sort out what our next movie assignment is that will drive the content of our next podcast. So, Peter, do you want to go ahead and pitch these films since you are up in the rotation?
Sure. So, I picked some stuff from both Amazon and Netflix this time, and I really was looking for something fun.
To kind of cleanse the palate after the deep dive we did into Orson Welles films.
Well, I mean, so we just had our meat and potatoes, and now I'm kind of wanting dessert. It's not to say they're any less complex; they're just different. Although at least one of them probably is not complex. All right, so the first one that I'm going to pitch is, one of my favorites, as I enjoy British humor, is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It came out on Netflix January 2nd. It is, you know, a fairly well-known comedy, starring the Monty Python crew, and it's probably the one I hear referenced the most when I'm at a Renaissance fair. The second is I have another love of Japanese monster movies. Godzilla, the Planet Eater. It came on. It's listed as a Netflix original, which I believe means that Netflix got the distribution rights for the United States from Toho. It came out on Netflix on January 9th. And then finally, an ode to childhood, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Amazon Prime, January 1st.
Now, looking at the webpage for Godzilla, is it correct that it is technically billed as Godzilla 3?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, all right.
In Japan at least.
Okay, so this is interesting. So we used to be a council of 3, and so our selection methodology included this whole arbitration process. Should the 2 co-hosts have picked opposing choices? Now, I guess it's just a partnership where one pitches and the other selects. So, which is how we ran it last time to pick the Orson Welles films.
Sure.
I like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I will admit I'm not particularly up for parsing that out as a review.
Fair.
I have never been a fan of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Also fair.
Now, is this the Gene Wilder one, or is
Yes,
there
it is.
Okay,
It is the Gene Wilder one.
Okay. I have an interest in Godzilla movies because my dad used to be into the live action ones.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid, we watched them. As I crossed over into developing my own tastes, it didn't really stick with me. Once I guess my last kind of thing that I used to watch regularly of that ilk was the afternoon cartoon, or action, not wasn't a cartoon because it wasn't animated, action adventure show, live action show, Ultraman.
Sure.
So, but since then I've faded off of that. My brother loves Godzilla movies and anime and everything. I also don't watch anime, so I'm gonna select Godzilla, the Planet Eater. And
sounds like I pitched you a few tough ones this time.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No, I'm just giving you a bad time.
No. So yeah, no, this is a good opportunity for me to finally check out an anime and also look in on a Godzilla film, movie, cartoon, and see what it is. So, do you know? Is this Japanese with English voiceovers and subtitles? Any idea?
No.
Okay.
Let me check.
Okay.
The trailer's in English.
Okay. All right. So either way, we'll do it regardless. I was just curious.
Yeah.
So I wish I could give everybody a date on when to come back. I don't know. Just subscribe to the YouTube channel, right? Like then you'll just get told when it's posted. Or any of the other outlets that we're on. So you could subscribe on SoundCloud. You could subscribe to us on Pocket Casts. Just sign up so you get notified. Then you don't have to worry about like when it's going down. And you know that's the movie we're going to be watching. So feel free to pick it up and watch it at any point. And then in general, if you want to give yourself a ballpark, like watch it within the next 2 weeks. So between now and the 19th of January, get on it and watch it. And then we'll let you know on Twitter or on the YouTube channel or somehow when we are going to shoot the show. So anything else, Peter, that you want to go over tonight?
Actually, I wanted to add that my dad and brother and I will also watched a lot of the old Godzilla movies when we were kids, and it's a love I've kind of continued. I was really really happy when they did Pacific Rim
Oh yeah, yeah,
and the sequel, which was all right.
yeah. Right.
You know, if you're a fan of the genre.
Yeah, and let me say, like, the fact that I don't watch them is not by any means a commentary on me feeling that they're like not good. It's just it's a thing that I haven't
Yeah.
picked up on, and it's a thing that I feel like bad about not like. It's a thing that I appreciate that other people love it, and so good on you and good on those. And I'm going to be interested to see how I feel about this movie after we sit down and take a look at it.
No, I totally get it. I don't like tomato soup, but I don't begrudge people who do.
Right. All right. Well, look, everybody, thanks so much for joining in with us tonight. That is going to do it for us. This has once again been It's Another Thing Movies, episode number 4, our continuing series on digital movie content that drops on streaming services in an effort to try and keep you informed and in tune with little gems that are out there that you may want to go view between Netflix and Amazon and anything else. We're going to be opening up the aperture a little bit in 2019, so everything is not necessarily going to be a Netflix film. And we're just going to see where the journey takes us. Who knows? So until next time, take care of yourselves. Happy hunting. Stay safe out there. Watch the movies that you like and come here to talk about the movies that you love. This has been Agastically Samus and Peter Morrow from the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Thanks so much. Join us for the next episode. That's going to do it for us. We are out of here.